Hello, everyone. Welcome again to my YouTube channel about academic writing and topics related to this fascinating academic writing field. Today, we will continue talking about revising and editing, but the focus will be on editing or revising a thesis. A thesis that is an academic text that can be written for obtain the degree of a bachelor's degree or a master's degree or a PhD degree. Of course, there are some variations in those three types of thesis, but we will see that many of the elements that we will be presenting here can be also useful for those types of thesis. Just a second, because, okay, you know that academic writing is very important at university because it is through academic writing that the institutions assess the students and through the text that they are required or to the text that the students write. Between or among those texts that they write are the thesis. But there are others such as the argumentative essay, the research article, the review, and this session is focused on the thesis, as we said. When you write the thesis, you may obtain the degree. But remember, the thesis a couple of years ago was an academic text that was mandatory at the bachelor's degree. Today, there are different options, but still there are some students who are interested in achieving the bachelor's thesis. So this video will be useful for them as well, but for master's and PhD students as well. So the issues that the students face when they are writing an academic text, such as a thesis, and not just such as a thesis, also the other documents or academic texts, is because sometimes they are not completely informed about the writing processes that are involved in the writing of an academic text, such as planning, drafting, revising, and editing. These processes, we also address them in previous videos, and I'm not going to go deeper on each of them. These processes are iterative and dynamic, which means that they occur in a very dynamic way rather than in a sequential way. You can go back and return as needed. So they are not completely informed about them. And as we are focusing on revising and editing today, we will be explaining a little bit what is revising and what is editing. And when you have accomplished or done those two processes, you can also go to the proofreading stage, which is something that is part of this revising and editing processes. It's not exactly as a stage, but it's part or is involved in the revising and editing. Revising exactly or specifically refers to the action to improve what you wrote through revision. You can set a period of time aside in order to revise or edit your academic text. And you can do that after one day or after a week so that you can see the document from a different perspective. You will play the role of a reader rather than a writer. And you may ask questions such as, is it clear this paragraph? Is it clear this idea? Is it clear all this chapter? Is it interesting? Does the text or the section or the paragraph or the idea accomplishes its goal? So ask those questions on. Also, you can rearrange, develop, cut, change, or add sections or paragraphs or ideas or sentences. That is, in general terms, what revising implies. The difference between revising and editing is that editing is mainly focused on fixing grammatical elements or linguistic aspects, such as tenses or words that are not appropriately used, adverbs, adjectives, etc. So it's more focused on grammar or linguistic elements. The other reason that the students have or that they face when they are writing an academic text is that they are not completely informed about the features that academic writing implies in terms of the text. such as that the text should be written for a specific audience, that the text should include a purpose or has a purpose, that should be organized, written in a fluent way, presented in an appropriate way, and with the adequate style. We will see some examples of these elements in the following slides. As we can see here, we have the main page of the master's thesis that I wrote during my master's studies. This is just for illustration purposes. As you can see here, we have at the top the title of the thesis, and I wrote the word purpose, which is one of the elements in the academic text, because we need to write the thesis in order to share the results of the study that we conducted. And in this title, it is implied what is the purpose: to show the results about the strategy training in the classroom to improve listening skills. And the other purpose is that it was written in order to obtain the degree of the Master of Arts at the University of North Texas and the University of the State of Mexico in Toluca. The other element is that we need to know who will be reading our text or academic thesis. In this case, is for an academic audience. The supervisory team, which were scholars or professors at this university, they were the first people who read my thesis. Nowadays, it's published online, and there are students or professors or other researchers who are interested in investigating listening skills who might be reading this academic text. That's why we have to consider that, because when we know who will be the audience, we have to establish or to implement the conventions that are required for that specific audience. The other element is organization. The text should be written in an organized way. As we can see here, we have the table of contents, the table of contents, and we have that this thesis is organized in 3 chapters. Well, there are more chapters, of course. The chapter 1 includes a subheading that is the introduction. Then we have the chapter 2 that includes the literature and other subheadings. We have chapter 3 that is the methodology, and then we have chapter 4 with the results and then discussion, and finally the conclusions. But this is important because if the reader wants to know what is in the methodology, they know that it's in chapter 3 and that is in page 12. So we need to include the page numbers, and we will know that this is a thesis that is organized in an appropriate way for the reader or the audience that is accessing to this material. The other element that we have to include in our academic writing is fluency. The text should be written in a fluent way. And to achieve fluency, we need to include coherence, cohesion, short sentences, and punctuation. All these together will make our text clear. How can I know that my text is written with cohesion? Well, cohesion is basically such as if it were glue, is something that will allow the text to be connected, the ideas connected with other ideas, or the paragraphs with another paragraphs, or the section with another section, or a chapter with the following chapter. And to do that, we can make use of transition words or linking words. A suggested website that we can use if we are not completely informed about linking words or transitions is the Manchester University Phrase Bank. You can go to that website and access the phrase bank. And we have to write with short sentences, as we can see here, one idea at a time. And coherence, that if you are talking about things that are done in the classroom, you continue talking about those activities in the classroom. And cohesion can be addressed or can be achieved through different devices, such as that we can use repetition, such as here in the classroom and in the classroom, or transformations, such as if you use interact here, you can talk here through this interaction. So we are using or changing the grammatical part of the speech, such as interact, that is a verb, into a noun here. So that cohesion is involved. The punctuation is as well very important, because if we have good punctuation, we will see how our text is read in a fluent way. If you don't include the punctuation, you will read something like, according to Davis, listening in the classroom is effective because students are receiving constant practice with specific objectives. In the classroom, students can interact with their classmates in pairs, teams, or groups through these interactions. So it sounds like without fluency. We need to make pauses and we need to read in a more fluent way. So we need to write it in a fluent way. So all these together will make the fluent element be evident in your academic text. There is another element in academic text that is style. To write or to include the style in your text, you have to write in a conversational tone, as if you were narrating or telling a story to the reader, rather than a list of sentences that are not connected or that are not just as a list of ideas. You should write in a way that sounds in a natural way, as if you were talking to the reader. You have to vary the sentences. Some of them might be short, some of them a little bit longer. Some of them might use a grammatical structure, and some of them may use a different grammatical structure. Variation is how we can achieve this conversational style. Another thing is that in the style, if we are writing using the APL style, we need to check that all the citations are formatted in the adequate form of the APA style. In general, the introduction is what the problem is addressed in this study. So that is in general terms what you should include in the introduction. Of course, there are specific elements, but at the moment we will keep it like that as a general idea, what the problem is that you are addressing in this thesis. Usually, the introduction and the discussion sections are written in active voice and present tenses, and past tenses are most commonly used in the results section. As you can see, we can have also to check that the verbs are strong verbs such as reported, argue, rather than stated verbs such as is or are that are not so strong. So try to include those verbs. If you say, for example, Hodges classifies, you know as a reader that classifies implies a classification, a taxonomy, a categorization of something. But if you say Hodges says is just says, but it doesn't imply that there is a classification. I hope that this is clear for you. And you have to consider as well whether the section that you are writing is to describe or to inform or to argue or to persuade, because in the introduction, usually we discuss, or in the discussion, or we construct an argument. But if we are in the results, we are describing the procedures. So check that as well. The other element is the presentation. The text or the master's degree or the thesis should be in a very clean way, without errors, without mistakes, and it should be very consistent in the type of English that you are using. British, all the text should be written in British English, or if you are using American English, all the text should be written with American or in American English. If you're using the APA style, check that all the citations are using that formatting style, because these are mistakes that are not acceptable, and you will be asked to revise again to your academic text. Check also the institutional requirements, because sometimes the institutions have some other requirements that you need to consider. Then we have the methodology section, that is in this case the chapter 3, and generally the methodology refers to what is the solution to the problem that you are investigating, to the topic, how you solve this situation or this problem. And usually the methodology is written in past tense, or can be written in past tense, and the use of passive voice is also acceptable as well. It's merely, or most of the times, describing the procedures that you did during the study. In the methods, writers give an account of how they carried out the research. So that is in general what the methodology, some of the methodology features. Then we have collected the data, and then we have the data. Now we have to analyze the plan, or we have to do the analysis of the data. And in the analysis plan, as you can see here, we can also use some passive voice and past tenses. So check that, and it's a descriptive section as well. Then we have the section of the results, and you know that they have to be or must be written in general in past tenses, and you can use the passive voice as well. If you are including information such as figures, tables, or charts or graphs, try to introduce first the table or the graph of the figure, and then format the table with a heading and using captions, and try to explain or interpret very briefly after the figure or the table or the graph what this table tries to say. Most of the times the results is just one section. When you combine the results with the discussion, is generally to explain or to make easier for the reader the information that you are conveying, especially when we are in sciences such as chemistry or biology. But if it's not so complex, the information, you can dedicate one section for the results and one section for the discussion. Another thing that we have to know here is that the results is basically, that concept is used when we have quantitative data or quantitative results, whereas findings is most commonly used when we are reporting the findings of a qualitative study. Then we have the discussion, and as we said, the discussion is written using active voice, and we have to use the preferences in writing in active voice and present tenses. And basically the discussion is what the results mean. What is the interpretation? You should interpret the findings or the results and connect them with the literature. There are some strategies that you can use in order to write the discussion, such as, for example, annotate the new things that you didn't know before the study. And when you have done that, one idea at a time or one sentence per new information that you didn't know before, group those sentences according to something that they have in common. And when you have the group, give a heading, a major heading for this group. And when you have that main heading will be written as a main heading in your thesis. And all the sentences that were grouped within that group will be the subheadings or the sub-levels in the discussion section. I hope that this is useful for you and that you can construct your discussion according to these suggestions. But remember that the discussion will be as well based on the findings. If you have 1 or 2 or 3 findings, you will organize them according to the findings, the objective of the study, and the research questions that you have. Remember that the organization could be based on a process or on a solution, problem solution, depending what is the theoretical framework that you use. That is how you will be organizing the discussion. Then we have the implications in the classroom. The implications is basically the usefulness of the research. And it's not the same as recommendations, because the recommendations are the specific actions that you are giving in order to solve the problems or the issues that were addressed. So the implications, please check in general that you have in the whole thesis that you have headings and subheadings consistently. If you use bold font in the main headings, use bold font in all the main headings throughout the whole thesis. If you use italics in sub-levels or second levels, check that all subheadings are with italics throughout the whole thesis. Check that the spelling mistakes, if you're using British English, everything should be with spelling in British English or in American English if you are using or writing the whole thesis using the American English. Check that there are no mistakes, that there are no errors, such as the use of homophones. Sometimes when we are typing in the computer, sometimes we can have typos. And instead of writing the number 2, we write the particle 2 or vice versa. That is not acceptable because they change the meaning of the information. And check that the citations and the quotes are formatted adequately according to the APA style. Remember that this thesis that I presented here was written using the APA style in the 6th edition, but now we are in the 7th edition and there have been some changes. So please check that and update yourself on which are those changes. We have the conclusions. The conclusions are shorter sections that summarize the main areas that the study cover. And they give a final judgment on the study, and they can give also suggestions for improvement on the field or for further research to be conducted. You may adapt the conclusions to the number of findings that you identify. It's like a mirror. If you have 3 main findings discussed, you may have 3 main conclusions in the conclusions section and recommendation sections. I hope it's clear what I try to say here. Finally, we have the references list. Remember, if you are using APA, check the 7th edition. That is the last one that we are this moment using. But here on the slide, we have the references that use the 6th edition, because this thesis was written from 2009 to 2011. So there are some changes, such as in the case of books. In the past, we included the name of the country, as you can see here. Now in the 7th edition, you can omit that. And there were other changes, such as in the past we included the DOI. Now we can include the URL instead of that one. And check that if you have in the articles reported, you have the journal in italics, and that you are reporting the volume and the issue. The volume is in italics and the issue shouldn't be in italics. So check that. There is here a typo or a mistake here. So try to avoid this type of mistakes. This is done intentionally so that you can see the difference. Then we have the appendices section. If you have just one appendix, just write the word appendix. But if you have more than one, you should write appendices and include all of them, such as the consent forms, the data collection instruments, things like those in that section. In general, here is the research typical structure. This can be applied for a master's or a bachelor's or a PhD thesis. Of course, there are variations, but many of these elements are like used in those documents or those academic texts. You need to include a title, you have an introduction, you have a literature review followed by the research questions, a methodology section. Within the methodology section, there are subsections such as the participants, the data collection instruments, such as interviews, questionnaires, the ethics permissions. Then we have the findings and discussions, if they are combined or if they are separated. Remember that this is something that varies sometimes. And if you have the findings, you can include one result or one finding, and then a little interpretation of it, then again another result. Suppose that you have just 3 findings or 3 results, do that in that order. And the similar structure in the conclusions. One conclusion per finding or result, second conclusion, third conclusion. Then we will have their suggestions for pedagogy, limitations of the study in each of these conclusions. And then we have the references list in APA style and the appendices. The appendices, that is like the consent form or additional examples of data that were not included in the text because of the number of words that are accepted or the limited number of words that you are allowed to include in the body of the thesis. So if there is information that should be included, just add it as an appendix and write a note in the section where they need to go to the appendix so that they consult it. So that is in general. This is just an example of an informal text so that you see it and avoid all these elements in your academic text or in your academic writing. Avoid the use of informal language. Avoid the use of contractions such as let's or we're or where is another your. Avoid the addressing the reader with the pronoun you. Avoid the use of adjectives because most of the adjectives are subjective language, and in academic writing, we need to be more objective. Academic or adverbs or adjectives are sometimes used or identified in the discussion section, but try not to overuse them. Be careful with that. Avoid the use of I or we. Of course, there are variations. There are some disciplines in which they accept the use of I or we, depending what is the type of study that you conducted. But generally, try to avoid that. If you are using abbreviations, remember that first you have to introduce them completely, what they mean, and then you, in the following or in the subsequent, you will use the abbreviation because it was already introduced. Try to consider the use of verbs or words that are just with one word rather than phrasal verbs, for example, that are integrated by 3 words, a verb, a particle, or a noun. Try to avoid that and try to keep the one-word words and keep the ones that are with Latin roots, preferably. Be careful with the use of punctuation. If you have a list, remember that you can use a comma. If you have a column, you can start after as well a list. Or if you have parentheses, it's because you might have illustrating something or making a parenthesis to insert some information that needs to be covered. It depends what type of punctuation you're using, depending what you want to say or convey. So in general, those are elements that you should avoid. So just in revision, try to revise the structure, try to revise the content, try to revise the conciseness, the clarity of the text. All these elements, all these parts are also addressed in the whole presentation that I am almost finishing. Edition, remember that is to focus more on fixing the language, avoid run-on sentences, use parallel structure, check subject plus verb agreement, tenses, possessive, plurals, check prefixes and suffixes, check capital letters, spelling, all those elements. So after you have revised and edited the whole text, proofread the text. If you don't have a proofreader, set a period of time aside and then go back to read your thesis or your academic text, and you will reflect on it and amend what is necessary. Revise again, amend it, and proofread it again, and then it's ready to be submitted to your professor or to your supervisors who will give you constructive feedback. Remember that constructive feedback is something to make you improve as a writer and in your field as academic researcher. It's not something to be taken as a personal criticism. So that is in general. This is some tenses that you might use, and they are available online. And this is the list of references consulted and some additional resources. Remember that we have the YouTube channel with other videos that can be useful for you to write your academic text in a more effective way and to develop overall as a better writer. Thank you very much. And remember to give thumbs up because all these videos are free for you, and based on your thumbs up and the likes and sharings with your friends, professors, students, or family, I will be producing more of these resources for you to learn about academic writing. Thank you very much and see you in the next video. Bye.